When the world hears the name Burkina Faso, what picture comes to mind? For many people, especially those watching from outside Africa, the answer is painfully familiar: conflict, poverty, displacement, military rule, a troubled nation in the heart of the Sahel. Those realities cannot simply be dismissed. But there is another question. What happens when one image of a country becomes the only image the world is allowed to see? Walk through Ouagadougou on a busy weekend, and another Burkina Faso begins to appear. Inside Waga Mall, families spend time together. Young people gather with friends. Shoppers move between fashion stores and local businesses. A modern gym welcomes customers. Outside, electric vehicles and charging stations point toward experiments with a different kind of urban transportation. None of this means Burkina Faso has suddenly become wealthy. It does not mean insecurity has disappeared or that every family is benefiting from economic growth. Even inside Waga Mall, some commercial spaces remain unoccupied. Beyond the capital, millions of people continue to face hardships far more serious than finding a place to shop or exercise. And that is precisely why these images matter. They do not replace the difficult story of Burkina Faso. They complete it. Under Ibrahim Traore, another question has increasingly entered the national conversation. Can Burkina Faso create more of what it consumes, develop its own businesses, build industrial capacity, and gain greater control over the value produced inside its borders? That question reaches far beyond one shopping mall. It touches an older African debate about who gets to define development and who gets to define Africa itself. If you value stories that examine Africa through what people are actually building and experiencing on the ground, follow this channel as we look beyond familiar headlines. Because today, we are not asking whether Ouagadougou has become Paris, Dubai, or New York. We are asking something more important. Could these ordinary scenes of business, technology, leisure, and unfinished progress reveal a Burkina Faso that the outside world has not been paying enough attention to? The difficult side of Burkina Faso is real, and any serious look at the country has to begin there. Years of insecurity have forced more than 2 million people from their homes. Poverty remains widespread, and communities outside the capital continue to face pressures that a modern shopping center cannot solve. These facts matter because our purpose is not to replace one misleading picture with another. The problem begins when crisis becomes the entire identity of a country. Burkina Faso is home to more than 20 million people, and their daily lives do not stop whenever international headlines move from one security incident to another. Nowhere is that easier to understand than in Ouagadougou. By 2025, the capital was estimated to have roughly 2.65 million residents. That means Ouagadougou is not a small settlement surrounded by the Sahel. It is a major African city with workers, families, students, entrepreneurs, merchants, transportation networks, restaurants, entertainment, and a growing demand for modern services. Burkina Faso has also been urbanizing for decades. As more people live and work in cities, their expectations change. Families need places to shop. Businesses need customers. Young people look for jobs and social spaces. Entrepreneurs need locations where they can introduce products and build recognizable brands. None of this eliminates the enormous difference between life in the capital and life in communities affected by insecurity. In fact, that difference is one of the most important parts of this story. Development that reaches only a small urban population cannot be considered a complete national transformation. But neither should that limitation make urban progress invisible. This is why Ouagadougou deserves attention without exaggeration. It shows us that two realities can exist at the same time. Burkina Faso can be struggling with a serious national crisis, while parts of its capital continue to grow, invest, consume, and experiment with new services. And if we want to see that second reality at street level, rather than through economic statistics, Waga Mall gives us an unusually simple place to begin. Now step inside Waga Mall and the story becomes more tangible. The importance of this place is not simply its polished floors, bright lights, or modern storefronts. What matters is what people are actually doing there. Families arrive to spend part of their weekend together. Young people meet friends. Customers buy food and browse clothing. Service businesses operate alongside fashion outlets. A modern gym gives residents another place to exercise and socialize. These are ordinary activities, and that is precisely what makes them important. They show urban life through the routines of the people who live it. The contrast becomes clearer when we compare the mall with how it appeared roughly a year earlier. At that time, many commercial spaces were still closed. Foot traffic was limited, and facilities such as the gym had equipment in place but were not yet fully operating. On the later visit, more customers were present, more businesses were functioning, and the mall felt considerably more active. Yet, the transformation is clearly unfinished. Walk upstairs and some commercial spaces remain empty. Other areas appear to be waiting for businesses to move in. That detail should not be hidden because it may tell us more about Burkina Faso's development than a perfectly framed picture ever could. Building infrastructure is one thing. Filling that infrastructure with sustainable businesses, paying customers, workers, and economic activity is another. A ribbon can be cut in a single afternoon. A functioning commercial community takes years to develop. That is why Waga Mall should not be presented as proof that Burkina Faso has suddenly become prosperous. It is better understood as a snapshot of a city in transition, where new forms of commerce and leisure are appearing while important gaps remain. And those empty storefronts create the next question. A modern shopping center can sell imported products from around the world. But if Burkina Faso wants deeper economic independence, simply becoming a larger consumer market will not be enough. The more important question is, who owns the businesses, who creates the products, who employs the workers, and how much of the money spent inside places like Waga Mall ultimately remains in Burkina Faso? That question takes us from consumption to something far more important: production. Inside and around Waga Mall, local businesses offer a glimpse of what that transition could look like. Fashion brands and service companies are part of the picture, but one of the most interesting examples is ITAUA, a Burkina Faso electric vehicle company that opened a showroom at the mall in 2025. The significance is not that Burkina Faso suddenly possesses a complete automobile industry. It does not. The more accurate story is that the country is developing local electric vehicle assembly capacity while still depending on foreign technology and components. That distinction matters. Industrial development rarely begins with a country producing every component by itself. It can begin with assembly. Local workers learn how the machines operate. Technicians gain experience. Suppliers emerge. Engineers develop new skills. If the process succeeds, more stages of production can gradually move into the domestic economy. For Burkina Faso, that would represent an important shift. Think of economic development in 3 simple stages. First comes consumption. People purchase products. Second comes local business. Entrepreneurs build companies that sell products and services to those consumers. Third comes production. Workers and businesses begin creating a larger share of those products themselves. A modern mall mainly demonstrates the first 2 stages. Burkina Faso's greater challenge is moving toward the third. That is why the sight of a locally branded electric vehicle inside Ouagadougou deserves attention, but not exaggeration. A showroom does not create an automobile industry. An assembly operation does not mean every part is made in Burkina Faso. What it can provide is a starting point. If local assembly leads to technical training, more skilled jobs, domestic suppliers, maintenance businesses, and eventually a greater share of locally created value, then the economic impact becomes much larger than the vehicle itself. And there is another reason this example matters. These electric vehicles are not confined to a showroom where visitors simply admire them. A small number have already entered daily transportation in Ouagadougou. That takes us outside Waga Mall and onto the streets, where Burkina Faso's experiment with modernization becomes even more interesting. The electric vehicles appearing on the streets of Ouagadougou are still a small experiment, but they move this story beyond the walls of Waga Mall. In February 2025, the Let's Go taxi service introduced about 12 Itawa electric vehicles in the capital. Passengers could request rides through an application and use electronic payment options. 12 vehicles will not transform transportation in a city of millions, but they demonstrate something more modest and measurable. Electric mobility has moved from display space into everyday commercial use. That brings us to one of Burkina Faso's biggest contradictions. While electric vehicles and charging stations are appearing in Ouagadougou, access to electricity across the country remains extremely limited. World Bank data for 2023 indicated that only about 21.7% of the population had access to electricity. So a charging station in the capital should never be mistaken for evidence that Burkina Faso has solved its energy problem. In fact, it tells us almost the opposite. The country is attempting to experiment with technologies of the future while still confronting basic infrastructure problems from the present. Solar energy could become important in bridging that divide. Burkina Faso receives abundant sunlight, and solar projects have increasingly become part of efforts to expand electricity access and reduce dependence on costly imported fuels. Solar systems can also help businesses cope with unreliable electricity, while battery storage can make renewable power more useful beyond daylight hours. But the scale of the challenge remains enormous. A solar installation at a commercial property cannot electrify an entire nation. A few charging stations cannot create a national electric vehicle network, and 12 electric taxis cannot replace the thousands of conventional vehicles moving through Ouagadougou. Yet, small beginnings should not automatically be dismissed. The real test is what happens next. Can 12 electric taxis eventually become hundreds? Can charging infrastructure spread beyond a few locations? Can solar power reduce operating costs for businesses? Can local technicians learn to maintain these systems? Those questions matter because modernization is not measured by how futuristic one photograph looks. It is measured by whether new technology becomes reliable, affordable, useful, and accessible to ordinary people. And to understand whether Burkina Faso has the economic strength to expand these experiments, we have to look beyond the streets of Ouagadougou and examine the country's broader economy. The broader economy gives us another reason to take these changes seriously, but also another reason to remain cautious. According to the World Bank, Burkina Faso's real economy grew by about 5.3% in 2025, compared with 4.8% the previous year. Real economic output per person increased by roughly 3%. Agriculture, services, and mining all contributed to that expansion. Those numbers matter because they suggest that the activity visible in Ouagadougou is not happening in complete isolation. More businesses, more services, and more consumer activity can emerge when the wider economy is expanding. But economic growth is not the same thing as prosperity. Burkina Faso still faces widespread poverty. Much employment remains informal, meaning millions of people work without the stability, protections, or predictable income associated with formal jobs. Electricity remains inaccessible to much of the population. Insecurity continues to damage communities, disrupt trade, and discourage investment. Opportunities available in Ouagadougou may also look very different from those available in rural areas. This is where the empty commercial spaces inside Waga Mall become an unexpectedly useful symbol. A country can build infrastructure faster than its economy can fill it. Constructing a storefront does not create a successful business. Opening a factory does not guarantee that its products will remain competitive. Announcing an investment does not guarantee permanent employment. For Burkina Faso, the real measure of progress will therefore be much more demanding than the number of modern buildings appearing in the capital. How many productive jobs are being created? How many local businesses can survive after the excitement of their opening day has passed? How much value from Burkina Faso's resources is processed and retained inside the country? And most importantly, are ordinary families experiencing meaningful improvements in their standard of living? These questions do not weaken the story of progress. They make it credible. Burkina Faso has economic momentum, but momentum is not victory. The country still has to turn growth into opportunity and visible projects into durable institutions. That brings us to Ibrahim Traore. Because if Waga Mall itself cannot simply be credited to one political leader, we need to ask a more precise question. What role does Traore actually play in the economic direction that these changes appear to represent? Ibrahim Traore's role in this story should begin with an important correction. There is no reliable evidence that he personally built Waga Mall, nor should the mall be presented as his personal project. His more significant connection to what we are seeing in Ouagadougou lies in the economic direction his government has been promoting. That direction centers on a straightforward idea. Burkina Faso should create more value from its own resources before that value leaves the country. Under Traore, the government has emphasized domestic processing, industrial development, local investment, and greater participation by Burkina Faso businesses. New or expanded projects have appeared in areas ranging from tomato processing and flour production to detergent and cement. The principle behind these efforts is easy to understand. For generations, many African economies have exported raw materials and then imported finished products at much higher prices. The raw material creates one level of income. Processing, manufacturing, packaging, transportation, branding, and retail create additional levels of value and employment. Traore's argument is that Burkina Faso should capture more of those stages at home. His government has also encouraged private entrepreneurs and members of the Burkina Faso diaspora to invest. Some industrial projects involve private capital, while others include state participation or cooperation with foreign partners. This means the strategy cannot accurately be described as the government simply taking control of every business. Now return to Waga Mall. The deeper question is no longer whether Burkina Faso can build a modern place where people buy products. It is whether more of those products can eventually come from businesses employing Burkina Faso workers, processing Burkina Faso resources, and developing Burkina Faso technical knowledge. That is where Traore becomes relevant to this story. Not because every new storefront, factory, electric vehicle, or construction project should be credited to one leader, but because his administration has made economic sovereignty and domestic production central political objectives. Still, political ambition is only the beginning. A factory must remain productive. A local product must compete on quality and price. Workers need lasting jobs, and businesses need customers. For that reason, the real test of Traore's economic vision will not be how many projects are inaugurated today. It will be how many are still creating value for Burkina Faso years from now. Economic sovereignty, however, does not mean Burkina Faso can or should isolate itself from the rest of the world. That distinction is essential to understanding Ibrahim Traore's approach. His government has repeatedly emphasized partnerships based on respect and greater national control. But Burkina Faso continues to work with international financial institutions, foreign investors, and overseas technology providers. Industrial projects have involved foreign partners, including Chinese investment, while local companies still depend on imported machinery, expertise, and components. This reveals a more practical definition of sovereignty. A sovereign economy does not need to manufacture everything alone. It needs enough knowledge, productive capacity, and bargaining power to decide which partnerships serve its interests. For Burkina Faso, that could mean importing technology today while training local technicians to maintain it tomorrow. It could mean assembling vehicles with foreign components while gradually developing domestic suppliers. It could mean accepting outside investment while negotiating for jobs, training, local processing, and a larger share of value to remain inside the country. That approach is more difficult than simply rejecting foreign involvement. It also comes with risks. Government intervention can support industries that would otherwise struggle to obtain financing, but too much intervention can discourage private investment or protect businesses that are not competitive. Foreign partnerships can provide capital and technology, but poorly negotiated agreements can create new forms of dependence. This is why Traore's political message must ultimately face an economic test. Factories must produce goods people actually want to buy. Electric vehicles must be reliable and affordable. Local businesses must survive without depending forever on government support. Investments must create productive jobs rather than impressive announcement. And Burkina Faso must develop the engineers, technicians, managers, and skilled workers capable of carrying these industries forward. If those things happen, greater economic sovereignty can become more than a political slogan. If they do not, new buildings and factories may eventually become expensive symbols of ambitions that were never fully realized. This is also where international criticism deserves serious attention. Outside institutions and foreign governments have raised concerns about Burkina Faso's security, investment, climate, political direction, and regional relationships. Some criticisms may be uncomfortable for supporters of Traore, but the strongest case for Burkina Faso's new direction will not come from dismissing every outside concern. It will come from results. International criticism of Burkina Faso should not be dismissed simply because it comes from outside Africa. Concerns about security, private investment, dependence on gold, political uncertainty, and regional relations are serious. Burkina Faso's withdrawal from ECOWAS alongside Mali and Niger has also created legitimate questions about trade and regional integration. But criticism should be examined with the same care as praise. There is no credible evidence that Western countries oppose Waga Mall electric taxis or Burkina Faso's development simply because they fear African progress. That claim may attract attention, but it weakens the argument by replacing evidence with speculation. The reality is more complicated. International institutions have warned about Burkina Faso's economic risks, while also recognizing its resilience and recent growth. That means both sides of the picture can be true. The country can face severe structural problems while still making measurable economic progress. Supporters of Ibrahim Traore should apply the same standard. Social media stories have sometimes exaggerated projects, attributed private development directly to Traore, or presented unverified claims as national achievements. Pan-African confidence does not require exaggeration. In fact, the strongest defense of African progress is accurate evidence, and this offers several lessons for other African nations. First, sovereignty should not mean isolation. Countries still need markets, investment, technology, and partners. Second, building a shopping mall matters less than developing businesses capable of producing what is sold inside it. Third, small beginnings should be judged by whether they can grow. 12 electric taxis are not a transportation revolution, but 12 can become 120 if the model works. Fourth, investment in people is more important than impressive buildings. Engineers, technicians, entrepreneurs, and skilled workers determine whether new industries survive. Finally, economic growth must create productive jobs. That is the standard Burkina Faso will ultimately face, just like every country seeking greater independence. The important question is therefore not whether Western critics are right or whether Traore supporters are right. It is whether Burkina Faso can convert sovereignty into productive capacity, investment into employment, technology into local knowledge, and political ambition into lasting improvements in everyday life. That test will be decided by results, not headlines. Return once more to Waga Mall, and the meaning of these images becomes clearer. Families are spending time together. Young people are exercising in a modern gym. Local businesses are looking for customers. Electric vehicles stand near charging points. Shops are operating while other spaces remain empty and waiting for someone willing to take the risk of opening a business. Those empty spaces may be the most honest image of Burkina Faso today. There are still enormous gaps to fill in electricity, employment, security, industrial capacity, income, and technical skills. Progress has begun in some areas, but no serious observer should pretend the journey is complete. The importance of Ibrahim Traore is therefore not that every new building can be credited to him. His greater significance lies in the question his government has pushed to the center of national debate. Who produces Burkina Faso's goods? Who controls its resources? And how much value remains with its people? That debate extends far beyond Burkina Faso. Across Africa news, discussions about the African Union and the future of West Africa increasingly intersect with developments in the Sahel. Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, and Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger have become symbols of a larger argument about sovereignty, while relations with France and other traditional partners continue to change. But sovereignty will ultimately be judged by what it delivers. Africa does not need to become Paris, Dubai, or New York to prove that it can develop. Progress can begin with a local entrepreneur finding customers, a farmer supplying a processing plant, a technician learning to maintain an electric vehicle, or a young worker gaining skills that did not exist in the local economy a generation ago. These are small steps, but nations are built through millions of small steps that eventually become institutions. If you want to continue examining Africa through evidence, everyday life, and the changes taking place beyond familiar headlines, subscribe and follow this journey with us. Burkina Faso has not completed its transformation. Perhaps that is exactly why Ouagadougou deserves attention. The question is not whether the country has already arrived. The question is whether what we are witnessing today can become the foundation of a more productive, confident, and self-directed Burkina Faso 10 or 20 years from now. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos.